words. In fact, the X part of it crosses the tail of the R. The RX graphic on the prescription blank is an attempt to recreate the Eye of Horus from ancient Egypt. So we are still using this as a magic symbol today to protect us against disease. Some of you in that area, others over on this side. Now the goal of every person in ancient Egypt was to reach the afterlife. What everybody wanted access to was the afterlife, because you live forever and you don't have to do any work. But they actually believed that their physical bodies were going to be resurrected into this afterlife. So they recognized that their physical bodies would have to be preserved in some way. And it was as a result of this belief that virtually everyone in ancient Egypt, rich and poor alike, was mummified. I saw a paper recently. There was a new estimate that between 70 million and 100 million people were mummified over the 3,000 plus year history of the ancient Egyptian civilization. But there were degrees of mummification, and you had to pay for it. So let's assume I live in ancient Egypt. Let's assume I have a relative who just died. I would go to the high priest of the mummification cult, and I would say, hey, my Aunt Nofret died yesterday. I'd like her to be mummified, please. The response I would get would be something like this. Okay, buddy, we will take care of all of that for you. Now, let's see here. Did you want the deluxe mummification, or the standard mummification, or the economy budget Home Depot mummification? Well, the cheap version, although it was cheap, was not very effective, and there'd be a lot of deterioration of the body. But the standard and deluxe versions were very effective. The entire procedure took 70 days, less than 2.5 months. They began by washing the body and then oiling it with palm oil to keep it supple. Then they would take a long metal rod with a hook at the end, go up through the left nostril, break through the ethmoid bone behind the eyes and sinuses, and gain access to the brain cavity. The brain would be stirred up, it was partially liquefied, and then it was removed a piece at a time through the left nostril. And then the brain was thrown away. They had no idea what the brain was for, they just discarded it. Then they would take a very sharp blade and make an incision in the abdomen, usually on the left side, and remove the internal organs, except for the heart. Yes, you have to have your heart with you when the time comes for that weighing of the heart test. So the heart had to stay inside the body. But all the other internal organs would be removed. Then the body was packed inside and out. In fact, it was completely covered for 40 days and 40 nights with a substance called natron. Now, natron is a naturally occurring chemical salt. It is still found today out in the Sahara, in the Western Desert, in a dry lake bed at a place called the Wadi El Natrun. And natron is a mixture of sodium salts. Most of it is sodium carbonate, like soda ash. But it also contains a natural baking soda, sodium bicarbonate. It has about 12% sodium chloride in it. Sodium chloride? Table salt, yeah, table salt. And a little bit of sodium sulfate. Well, all of these sodium salts together make a very powerful desiccant, a drying out, a dehydrating agent. And after a human body has been packed in natron for 40 days and 40 nights, guess what? You've got a mummy. They did no other treatment of the body. None was necessary. They simply cleaned off all the natron, put the jewelry back on the body. Then the body would be wrapped in up to 400 yards of linen bandages. Each finger, each toe was wrapped individually. Then the wrapped mummy would go into a wooden coffin, like that one. The wooden coffin goes into a stone sarcophagus, like that one. a stone lid on top of that, household goods all around, and that was your funeral. Now, your internal organs were packed separately in natron, also for 40 days and 40 nights. And then they were wrapped separately. We have examples here of internal organs that have been dehydrated in natron and then wrapped. And then these internal organs would be placed inside these 4 jars. They are called canopic jars. There's one for the lungs, one for the intestines, one for the liver, and one for the stomach. And then these 4 canopic jars would be placed inside the tomb near the sarcophagus. Not too far away, because once you get resurrected into the afterlife, you're going to get hungry. It certainly would be nice to have your stomach nearby so you could have a meal. But that was the procedure. It took the ancient Egyptians 500 years to develop this mummification technique. A lot of mistakes along the way, trial and error. But once they hit on the idea of covering the body with natron for 40 days and 40 nights, bingo! They knew they had the right answer. The mummies they created will last indefinitely because they are totally dehydrated. You know, we still use a form of natron today. Do you ever get a piece of electronic equipment in a cardboard box, and inside the box you found this? It says "do not eat" on it? Huh? This is actually a form of natron. It is removing the moisture from the air inside the box, so the moisture won't damage the equipment. So we're still using a form of natron today. All right, before we move on, these little statues are kind of interesting. You'll see them throughout our exhibit in all of the exhibit cases. Some are carved out of limestone, like that one. Some are carved out of wood, like those in the case over there. But most of them are made out of this blue glazed ceramic material called faience. These are servants for the afterlife. They are called ushabti. Now, ushabti is actually an ancient Egyptian word, and it translates as answerer, one who answers. And the idea was, when you got resurrected into the afterlife, if there was any work that had to be done there, by magic, your ushabti would spring to life and do your share of the work for you. Many of them carry an inscription that reads as follows: if the deceased is called to work, I will answer, I am here. That's why they're called answerers, or ushabti. And there would frequently be 401 of them in a burial. 365, one for each day of the year, plus 36 extra to supervise, to make sure the work got done. Now, just between you and me, I am currently working on a magic spell from chapter 6 of the Book of the Dead to bring them to life in this life, to take out the trash and do my other chores for me, but it's not working. I must be pronouncing the words wrong. That's all I can think of. Now, as you come by, you'll notice this large plexiglass panel covered with faience necklaces, winged scarabs, images of the gods, good luck charms, magic amulets. This is all the kind of material that would be included in between the layers of linen bandages on a mummy. And behind that panel is a mummy standing upright with his head unwrapped. It is the mummy of an adult male. We actually estimate this gentleman was about 60 years old when he died. Now again, that was comparatively old for that time. Life expectancy during this period, you know, he's actually from the 25th dynasty of the New Kingdom. Life expectancy was probably not much more than about 35. But, as it happens, we know a lot about this particular gentleman. His name is Harwa, and his most important title was doorkeeper of the Temple of Amun. That is the huge Karnak temple in Egypt. And that made Harwa kind of an important person. It actually put him in charge of a lot of the administrative affairs of that temple, including supervision of a large agricultural estate, a big farm that belonged to the temple. You know, this was how the temples were supported in those days. the pharaoh would donate farmland to a temple, and the temple would live off the cash crops that it grew on that farmland. And Harwa was in charge of one of these big temple farms, big agricultural estate. And the reason I know all this stuff about Harwa is because we have Harwa's coffin standing right here next to him. And when you have a coffin that is shaped like this, see, this is not rectangular like those earlier coffins we looked at. This one is carved to look like a mummy. It's in what we call the anthropoid or mummiform shape. And when you have a coffin carved in this shape, all you need to do is look between the feet. That's where you will find an inscription listing the name and all of the official titles of the person in the coffin. That's why I know all these details about Harwa's life. He has his CV, his resume, in effect, his autobiography, written on the outside of his coffin, right there. So, here on the front of the coffin is a scene with Harwa laid out as a mummy on his funerary couch. Underneath are the 4 canopic jars containing his internal organs, and hovering over him, that is his Ba. It is the bird with a human head, and it represents the movable part of his soul or his spirit. It is hovering over his mummy, waiting for exactly the right moment to rejoin the mummy for resurrection into the afterlife. On either side of the scene are 2 goddesses. This is the goddess Isis, and this is her sister, the goddess Nephthys. And they are mourning Harwa. We know they're mourning him because Nephthys over there is touching her forehead with an open palm like this. Almost looks like a military salute. Here's a statue of Isis here doing the same thing. Touching the forehead with an open palm was the sign of grief or mourning in ancient Egypt. Above that scene is another goddess. This is the goddess of the sky. Her name is Nut. She has wings spread to protect Harwa in his coffin. There are those magic eyes of Horus again, and the Ankh symbol. And the face on this coffin is painted green. Green was the color of fertility and resurrection and rebirth. Because whenever the Egyptians planted a farm field, what happened to it? It turned green with new plant life. So the color green had a powerful symbolic significance for the ancient Egyptians. The other mummy in this case is the mummy lying on the floor of the case. It is the mummy of a young boy. We think his name might have been Hori, and we think he was 12 years old when he died. Again, notice how short he is, because they didn't get enough calcium in their diet. Now, since his internal organs were removed for mummification, we do not know the cause of death. But from the x-rays we took, especially x-rays of his hands, we learned that he suffered from arthritis. He had juvenile arthritis. Arthritis is actually quite common among the people of ancient Egypt. Also, this unfortunate young man has a birth defect. He was born with a clubbed foot. His right foot is badly formed. And also some of the x-rays show evidence of poliomyelitis. So we suspect that Hori probably had a lot of medical problems. But when he was buried wearing his favorite cap. And that style of cap is still worn today by young Egyptian boys. It's like their version of a baseball cap. It's just a simple linen cap to protect their head against the rays of that hot Egyptian sun. But it's a tradition that has lasted for thousands of years. Questions?
Why do you think his name is Hor?
Because there were some the records connected with him that used the word Hori, but we don't have proof. It wasn't written on the bandages or anything like that, so we suspect it was Hori, but we can't prove it.
Is that his coffin?
No, that's a different one. That's from the Roman era,
Okay.
much later.
I've got one.
Yes, sir.
Because going back to the mummification process, you said they soak the bodies, or immerse the bodies in natron for 40 days. Was there any spiritual significance to 40 days, or did it actually take that long?
No, they trial and error, they discovered that that was the perfect length of time, 40 days and 40 nights,
We
okay?
said days and nights. maybe.
Days and nights, and I say that because a lot of people remember the Bible talking about it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. It did this for 40 days and 40 nights. In the Bible, this just means a long time. It doesn't necessarily mean 40 days and 40 nights. But in this case, it does mean 40 days and 40 nights. Okay? Because they discovered that was the perfect time. The mummies that came out after 40 days and 40 nights lasted indefinitely.
So if they were a couple days short?
They weren't. No, they kept very close records. They kept very good, very close tabs on this. This is a very important procedure we're talking about here. And this is an important industry in ancient Egypt. This whole mummification procedure. You got to get mummified, you got to get wrapped. You got to buy all these amulets. What kind of a coffin are you going to have? All right, you got to buy that. If it's wood, it's going to be imported. It's going to be very expensive. Okay, so this whole procedure, actually, Egyptologists estimate if you lived in ancient Egypt, you would spend 2 years of your income on your funeral. Okay, so the better job you've got, nicer funeral you're going to have. Okay? If you are very poor, you get cursory mummification, wrapped in a single linen sheet, buried in a common underground tomb chamber along with tens of thousands of other mummies. Okay? And there'd be a lot of deterioration of the body because the mummification was not thorough enough. All right, we're going to step out in the large room, turn right, go up the ramp, and we're going to take a look at the Pharaoh's boat.